and you are in Gothic land, a place where we talk about all things Gothic. I help you with your critical thinking, with your communication fears, and we talk about all these things that we really like. Oh, and we're live now, right? So, hello, Gothic friends, this is Alice, and you are in Gothic land, a place where we talk about all things Gothic. I help you with your fears, your communication fears. We talk about your critical thinking, and I try to help you create this transformation for you. I want you to see how the Gothic can work for you, what it can do for you, not just entertain you, but also in other areas like overcoming your fears, and not just in writing or speaking, finding out who you are, finding out about your identity, but always through this Gothic lens. What we've been doing so far, we've done 2 sessions. This is the third live sessions, the third live session, and we're going to be doing 10 in total. The purpose of this is to bring you some light, because when I started learning about the Gothic myself, I found myself that I was very lost. There was a lot of information. I did part of it in my degree, but then I wanted to continue, and because of life, life takes over, and I decided that I had to actually do to continue with my PhD and my master's. I had to move back to the UK, and I had to settle back in Spain. So I decided that since there was not an online option at the time, and even nowadays it's a bit complicated still, I decided to go solo and to do this on my own. And in this process, I've met wonderful people. I'm having now collaborators. So the Gothic has brought a lot of good things for me. And what I would like to do is help you actually, if you're in a similar situation, I would like to help you overcome the problems or the obstacles that you will find in this journey through to learn more about the Gothic and to work with it, to make a living out of it, and if not making a living fully, at least to that it can actually help you bring in an extra aspect to your career, okay, and if you're a student, to your degree as well. So it's a win-win for everybody. So this is an introduction to what I was trying to say, because I didn't say at the beginning of the series. So this is something that needed to be said and needed to be shared with you. Okay, so after the introduction, remember that every day I will post also a link on the comments with my free PDF, which is called Down the Rabbit Hole, and it tries, I think it does a good job of that, with future students and with people who contact me, and with current students as well, of helping you out in the 3 areas I work on. And the first area is working on your critical thinking to improve your communication skills, and we do that through the Gothic lens and the Gothic tools. So there are these 3 blocks in this PDF. I actually help you. I give you the 6 how to work on the 6 critical thinking questions adapted to the Gothic. I also give you 5 points, 5 aspects on how to improve your communication skills using the Gothic, and another 5 bullet points on how to find the resources, the Gothic mentality, and how everything gets joined, how it all joins together in the same space. All right. So the last 2 days we've been looking at the following things. I'm just going to give you a very quick summary of what we saw in origins of Gothic literature in England. Yeah, remember that it's all England, even though I connect also with other countries. I mentioned briefly, I made some references to the okay. Right, okay, so sorry about that, there was a bit of a connection problem. So I made some references also to what happened in Germany, because Germany is a direct influence to the English Gothic. I also made, and I will keep making some references and comparisons to the Spanish arena, because I'm very interested in what happened here in comparison with England. And this was part of the introduction of the origins as well. I also told you the first day why is it so difficult to describe. Okay, and I gave you all my few reasons. Day 2, we talked about the different periods, because I consider that knowing about the periods is going to help you have this classification that will stop you from getting all your works and your authors mixed up and not knowing why one trend continued or not. What, you know, it will make more sense of what you study and what you learn about the Gothic by knowing the different periods. Then we also talked about what you actually learn by doing this, and then I told you how knowing about all these areas can benefit you now. So today we're going to move on to the periods, but because I'm going to extend a little bit the information so it's really clear and you know where we're going, I'm only going to look at the first 4 periods, because in total I described to you yesterday 8. It doesn't mean that there are only 8 periods, because there could be subcategories, and probably we will have to look into that in more detail, and this is something we could do if you join me in the future courses. I just dropped that there. But for now, I just want you to concentrate in the first big blocks that are really obvious and are the first 4 blocks that everybody talks about. So let's move on then. After we've talked about the periods, then we will also be in the next days is when I'm going to start talking about literary devices, and you will see how is that relevant and why is it in that order. And then you're going to start making the connections daily on your every day. The intention is that every day you have information that you can take away with you. You can take notes on these live events. You can take that with you. You can start putting some of the ideas I give you into practice. So if you are already a little bit on the ball, you will see that you can start doing a lot of these things. Right. So as I said, we're going to work on the first 4 periods. The first one, if you remember, this is good for revision too, and the first pre-Gothic period, or also called the pre-Romantic period, goes between 1721 1763, more or less. Yeah, in some places, I said yesterday that the timeline sometimes is not accurate, it's not exactly like that, but there are some moments because of the works and the books of certain writers that we can more or less define this period. So in this first chunk we have 1721 to 1763, what we call the graveyard poets. They were also, another name that they received was the cemetery poets, for obvious reasons. And one of the main characteristics about them is that they had a high concern on life and death. Hey, and when I saw this the first time, I thought it was brilliant, because that is actually my concern. Is life, death, and everything in between. What happens to the body once we're gone, the afterlife, all the ugly side of death that nobody really likes talking about. So initially it was started by 4 poets, and the names are Thomas Gray, Robert Blair, Thomas Parnell, and Edward Young, but there were more later on, so the list is longer, but these were the first 4, like the pioneers on this type of poetry. It doesn't mean that they started, it doesn't mean that they were the first ones talking about death and what happened to the body. A lot of people before talked about that, and they just took those ideas and they took those writings and they started using it again, which is what actually makes sense with everything we've been saying so far, that things don't just pop up from nowhere. There is a story, a history. It's just that movements and ideologies and everything starts getting different names depending on the period of time. So these writers, even though they were highly criticized by some and they were venerated by others, the reality is that they had a great impact in the following writers, the contemporary writers, but also the writers that followed them later on. What are the main characteristics of the writing? We have mentioned already some characteristics, but we have these, the main characteristic probably is this melancholic tone in their poems, and is this idea of death, like under this melancholic point of view, you know, is you die and it's so sad, but it's got like this touch, right? It's not, they're not rebelling, but they talk about possibilities about life after death, the supernatural, it's a bit the ghostly, but they concentrate pretty much in these areas of what happens to bodily decomposition and all this. So they line, or pretty much they were in the lines of the romantic movement, but because we can see already these dark elements, they're closer to the Gothic. They're not the romantic movement, but they belong to that period. It's pre-romanticism, so we cannot really say Gothic just yet, because we know that there's one book that started the whole thing. So they were relevant even up to the beginning of the 19th century. So it's a little bit of a shame that maybe they're not so well known in other places, and that it's a shame that we just get in other countries, like in Spain, we just get a lot of information about Victorian times, as we said yesterday, but we don't know much about these other writers. And at least I don't recall working on these poets when I was doing my degree. As I said before, other authors were mentioned, but not the graveyard poets, which is a shame. So I had to say that. So the influence they had, for example, when you read Percy Shelley or Lord Byron, you are going to see the influences of these writers on these poets, on these other writers. So that's how important they were. So there are some elements that I really like about them. One is the fact that they really concentrate on disease, body decomposition, death, as I said. So what is that? That translates into fear of dying, and this melancholy about, well, it's unavoidable, but under a melancholic point of view. So it's like these are like the recurrent motifs, yeah, fear of death, which, as I said, is one of my things. That is overall very, very summarizing the main points. We are not going to go into depth. I'm not going to tell you about the poems. I'm not going to analyze anything. The intention of these sessions, as I said before, is for you to have an overall idea so you can have a structure in your mind. The second period, the beginning of the Gothic or the early Gothic, that goes from 1764 to 1788, and if you remember, is inaugurated, or the main writer, the main reference here, reference is Horace Walpole with the Castle of Otranto. Now, taking that book into as the representative of the movement, we see, and there is a list of elements, we're going to see that the Gothic has as main characteristics strange, mysterious events, damsels in distress, evil rich villains, castles with dungeons and lost corridors, dark settings, inheritance, corrupted religious men, monks generally, impossible love stories, ghostly and supernatural events and encounters, and it looks back at medieval times and romances, and also the dark landscapes and ruins. And probably by mentioning medieval times, if you are a bit like me, you are probably thinking, well, Shakespeare already talked about this. Shakespeare already had ghosts in his plays. Shakespeare already had betrayals and inheritance problems. Yes, that's why they go back to these medieval times. They're recuperating this idea. So the Gothic is not new. As a label, as a genre, it is. That's what we have to have clear. Okay, the third period, High Gothic, that goes from 1789 to 1813. Oh, my microphone might be a little bit too far. Hang on. I've just realized, I hope you've been listening okay. I don't think there are any comments. Okay, I'm just going to check if there are any comments. Right, I suppose now you can hear me better. Yeah, if anybody's here, you can go thumbs up. That would be great. Okay, so I forgot about my microphone. I'm thinking I'm so free and happy here talking with no things in the way. There you go. My microphone. Now you can hear me better, right? Sorry about that. So, as we were saying, this third period of High Gothic, 1789, 1813, we have Anne Radcliffe and Matthew Gregory Lewis. In Spain, I mentioned we had. Okay, thank you. Hola, ¿qué tal? mi hermana, no voy a decir la palabra, mi hermana. Okay. So, perfect. So, as we were saying, in Spain we had Vicente Martínez Colomé, who wrote De Valdemaro, right? So, what happens in this third period? In this third period, it's very interesting because there's a mixture of elements. You have to think that for every period, we have the elements don't disappear. They just evolve. A lot of them maintain, they stay, but also new ones are added, and then the rest kind of mutate. Elements move. It's like languages. I love the Gothic because it's like languages. Languages evolve. They never the same. We maintain some of the elements, some of the characteristics of the origins, but it's a living thing. So the Gothic is the same. So what mixture of elements do we have here? We have all the above. Everything that happened in the previous period didn't just all of a sudden stop. It continued. But what Anne Radcliffe did was to give the female character a voice, which I have to say, that's very nice. And she did that by making the female characters less vulnerable. So if I said that in the previous period we had the damsel in distress, she couldn't do anything. In this case, she actually makes her more active. She's got a more active role. She's equal to men, and that is very important, and also will actually have a repercussion in future female writers. So that's how important that is. But not just only for other writers, also because her audience will be listening, will be reading to these messages, and this is where it got a little bit complicated, because by giving young females the idea that they could be more active, it was one of the problems that society didn't quite approve. That's why the Gothic was like second-hand literature. It wasn't high class, it wasn't high brow. That's what the name is. It was like low brow. But she managed to get a lot of audience, and she managed to get her books out there. And even nowadays, we still read Anne Radcliffe. I have to say, though, that the one thing I do not like from Anne Radcliffe is the fact that she tried to find, I like it and I don't, she tried to find objective explanations to the paranormal. And by doing that, she removed away the beauty of the initial Gothic, this surprise element. She took away things that, the sublimity, sublime novel, she removed boundaries by doing that. So she wanted to find these logic explanations, and then almost like saying this doesn't really exist, which is something I don't like, because she initiated these parodies that then later on, Jane Austen, for example, she took again. And I have to say, and a lot of Jane Austen followers will hate me for this, but I hate Jane Austen. I'm going to say, because she mocked the Gothic, and I can't forgive her for that. So, exactly, se carga el misterio y la fantasía. Es que es eso, is that. If we kill and we start giving explanations to everything, which we do naturally, we try to give explanations to our everyday lives, to things that are not real, to things that we don't understand, that we don't see. They might be real in another plan, but not in our real world. So by doing this, we kind of closing other doors. We're not letting our fantasy go on either. We stop. It stops us from being creative. It stops us from being to have this critical thinking and to look for solutions and answers. If we go, well, okay, by trying to find the logic, yes, she was moving the critical thinking, but she was killing part of the beauty of having this eerie voice there without an answer. This is something that nowadays we really, really love. So what she did then, going back, she did something important, which was to highlight that she stimulated the reader. So that was very good. She stimulated the readers through the imagination and perceived evils, while horror closes them off through fear and physical dangers. This is a definition from Wikipedia. Wikipedia sometimes is very good, and it has to be said. So she wanted to stimulate, I'll repeat that quote because it's very important. She tried to stimulate readers through imagination and perceived evils, while horror closes them off through fear and physical dangers. So it's not all bad. Trying to look for a logic explanation, what makes the reader is keep thinking, and thinking is good. But then, yes, a lot of the readers were deceived because they were like, well, we want to play the game of the ghost. Let us have a ghost and don't kill it. So, yeah, a lot of, there were people that were okay and some people that were not okay with that. Okay, so the other aspect that will then move on to the next period is the emphasis on the negative side of the Catholic Church, with a great emphasis on the Inquisition. And here is where us Spaniards come into play. I'm sorry, we were part of their stories. We were the other. We were, our religion, the Inquisition was terrible at that time. It killed many people. So we were in the land of the horror landscape. So England found that Spain was fantastic for creating stories that had all these Gothic elements. They had these corrupt monks, that it had all these killings, manipulation. It didn't say much about us as a country, but okay, we were there. And thankfully everything changed, and we also became writers, and we also started talking. Like, this is something I mentioned yesterday. The author also had a voice, and the author also wrote back and spoke back to the Gothic, and we also have our own productions. But yes, that was the historical period. That's why it's so important that we know about our timeline and about our historical timeline in the Gothic. Right, the fourth period, and this is going to be the last period I talk about today. Tomorrow we will continue with the next four. Remember, this is very short. So the fourth period is the Late Gothic, also called the Late Gothic, and it goes from 1814 to 1836. And here we have some of the representatives, as I mentioned before, Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, and Charles Maturin, who closed the period, right? He closed this period, and you're going to see why. So, as I mentioned before, Jane Austen took back from Anne Radcliffe the parodies, which I hate. So she wrote Northanger Abbey, and she took away the fantasy, she took away this ghostly environment, and she mocked the Gothic literature, okay? But then we also moved to the originality of Mary Shelley with Frankenstein, and her novel created a new whole thing, a new whole way of writing and considering the creation of humanity. And she brought many issues. It was this confrontation with man versus God, good versus evil, a lot of dualities, also abandonment issues, identity issues. So Frankenstein should be analyzed on its own. But so you see, in this period of time, the inherited elements from before, we still have our dark settings, we have death, we have corpse, we have bodies that come back to life, a little bit like the zombie thing appears here as well. So that continued, those elements continued. But it was actually Charles Maturin who gave all of those a twist, and that's why he closed this period, because it was the only one who made it really, really that far. As his predecessors, he was also very worried about Catholicism and the Inquisition. I mean, his book, I'm not kidding, is this size, right? I've got it here. Is this big and complex. A lot of stories inside the stories, like a big matryoshka, and it's not easy to read, and it takes you a while, but it's very rich in the following elements. So we have well, even Maturin himself, he says that he declares that he's a determination with this book. He had a determination to display all his diabolical resources. So he was looking at what was going on around him, and he thought, I want to produce this. It wasn't easy, and it took him a while. But then we have in the front of this book, there's always, I love buying Penguin books because of the comments at the beginning, the introductory comments that we always get for the books. And in this edition, Victor Sage says that we have with Melmoth the Wanderer, yeah, that's the name of the book. Yes, I was mentioning the author all the time, but not the story. So Melmoth the Wanderer, we have a hybrid romance, worries about the writer's Irish nationalism, so identity, and a hyperbolic and perverse characters, so mainly the main character, Melmoth. We have good versus evil, we have heaven and hell, we have immortality, we have cursed objects, we have the portrait, and it's no coincidence that his nephew, I've gone blank now, Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde, there we go. Oscar Wilde was Maturin's nephew. And no surprise that he took the portrait as a main element in Dorian Gray. That's a nice, interesting point. So, okay, so we have, summarizing, wrapping up, he closed that because after that we have the Victorian period, and the Victorian period is huge, so we need to close with that. So, summarizing what we talked about today, the first pre-Gothic period, the graveyard poets, I gave you all the characteristics, the main characteristics of that period, and what these graveyard poets starting setting for the following writers. We've talked about the beginning of the Gothic era, or early Gothic, with the opening of the Gothic with Horace Walpole, the Castle of Otranto, and I gave you all the elements as well. Then we've looked at the third period, High Gothic, with Anne Radcliffe, Matthew Gregory Lewis, 1789-1813, and again what they inherited and what they added, and then how we closed this fourth period. I've mentioned 2-3 authors, no more, it's not the intention in these sessions, that goes between 1814 and 1836, right? So tomorrow we're going to talk about Victorian Gothic, Modern Gothic, Post-War Gothic, and Postmodern Gothic. So again, a lot of interesting things. You're going to see how all these elements evolve. You're going to start seeing recurrent themes that even nowadays we have and that we have inherited, and you're going to start making these connections. So we're going to get your critical thinking going all the time. I hope it's working. I hope you're finding that this is not just giving you information. I hope I'm transforming your thoughts, that I'm transforming the idea that you had about the Gothic, that you can maybe even make connections with your everyday lives, your work, your studies, and see how the Gothic appears in your everyday life. Even in science, there's Gothic, very much. And remember that if you want to start walking with me through this fantastic journey, I can take you by the hand. You can already start downloading your free PDF, Down the Rabbit Hole. I will put all the links here, and that's in gothicalice.com. Free PDF where I talk about critical thinking, I talk about communication skills, I talk about the Gothic itself. 3 pages with basic information that you can start using to overcome your communication fears, okay, through the Gothic lens. Okay, so friends, thank you very much. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope to see you here again tomorrow. We have more good things, more learnings. Leave me your comments. If you're watching this later, you can still leave the comments below, and I will come back to you. I will answer them in the videos, or you can write to me also. I have a contact page in my gothicalice.com. There's a contact page. We can have a face-to-face chat if you want. If you're a writer and you're stuck, or if you have to speak in public and you need tools, I'm here to help you. I'm here to serve you. So thank you very much, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Take care. Be very Gothic.